Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most fascinating places on Earth, Papua New Guinea. It's a place where ancient prehistoric traditions are literally colliding head-on with the rapid demands of modern statehood. We're going to untangle this incredibly complex history and try to make sense of what is truly a paradox of paradise.
Let's kick things off with a staggering number, 800. There are roughly 800 distinct languages spoken across Papua New Guinea today. Now, that isn't just some quirky linguistic fact. It represents a history of continuous human settlement stretching back at least 50,000 years. Imagine that. These communities migrated, they settled in these incredibly isolated pockets, and they developed their own unique ways of life, completely cut off from the rest of the world, and honestly, often from each other.
To understand how communities living in prehistoric conditions for millennia rapidly transitioned into a modern parliamentary democracy, we'll quickly navigate through 5 chapters: the baseline of extreme diversity, the collision with the outside world, the sprint to independence, the wealth beneath the soil, and finally, modern growing pains.
All right, Chapter 1, Extreme Diversity, a Baseline.
To really understand the people here, you have to look at the geography that created such incredible cultural fragmentation across this massive 462,000 square kilometer nation. The extremes here are just wild. Down on the coastal lowlands, you've got these hot, sweltering conditions averaging 30 degrees Celsius, complete with massive, nearly impassable swamps like the Fly River Delta. But then, right in the middle of the island, there's this unbroken backbone of incredibly rugged highlands. We're talking peaks towering over 4,000 meters, like Mount Wilhelm, where the temperature drops to an average of 18 degrees. It's these deep, isolated, high-altitude valleys and dense rainforests that kept tribes so physically separated that hundreds of different languages and belief systems evolved completely on their own.
And that intense geographical isolation sets the perfect stage for Chapter 2, Collision with the Outside, and the historic whiplash that followed. So, imagine being completely isolated for millennia, and then suddenly, foreign colonizers just arrive. European invaders literally forced railways over mountains and cut roads straight through snake-infested sacred jungles. The shock was so incomprehensible for the locals that they viewed these newcomers with terrifying awe. As the source material notes, they were sometimes taken as, quote, white masks with a supernatural power, or as non-humans. I mean, the collision between these two worlds was absolute and deeply traumatic.
What's really mind-blowing is the sheer speed of this progression. Within a single century, the island was carved up by European powers, starting in 1884 with German and British treaties. Then, by 1914, during World War I, Australians took control. Fast forward to 1942, the devastating reality of World War II hit, with the Japanese occupation, thrusting these local tribes right into the middle of mechanized global warfare, where their villages and crops were literally burned to the ground. And incredibly, just a few decades later in 1975, they were pushed towards complete self-rule. It is an astonishingly compressed timeline for any society to absorb.
Which brings us right to Chapter 3, the sprint to independence, a compressed timeline.
So, September 16, 1975 rolls around, and power is officially transferred. Prime Minister Michael Somare and Governor General Sir John Guise took the helm, with Guise actually making history as the first indigenous head of state of a Commonwealth nation. Now, independence brought incredibly high hopes, celebrated with national songs in a converted horticultural amphitheater. But the staggering reality of trying to force hundreds of distinct clan-based societies into a unified Westminster-style parliamentary democracy, well, that was, frankly, a very clumsy sprint. This sprint turned into an almost impossible balancing act. The young government immediately faced severe political instability. Get this, there were 4 votes of no confidence in just the first 14 months. They were trying to govern through a unicameral parliament with just 111 seats. Think about that math for a second. Just 111 seats attempting to fairly represent 847 distinct peoples and languages. Add to that a bizarre legal duality where English common law somehow had to operate alongside local customary law, which, by the way, still applies to most civil matters. The young state was just grappling to handle this massive leap into modern governance.
And beyond just the politics, we enter Chapter 4, Wealth Beneath the Soil, Managing Resources. The new nation suddenly found itself needing to manage the staggering natural wealth buried beneath its porous volcanic earth. But the paradox here is really stark. Out of a population of roughly 6 million people, A massive 85% still live in rural areas. They rely heavily on subsistence agriculture, basically growing sweet potatoes and yams just to survive. Only 15% live in urban centers like Port Moresby. So for the vast majority of the country, their actual connection to the modern cash economy is incredibly tenuous. Yet, right alongside that subsistence lifestyle, the national economy is heavily propped up by massive exports. They have these world-class mineral deposits, copper, gold, and oil, coming from immense billion-dollar projects like the Oak Teddy and Porgera mines. They also export agricultural cash crops like coffee and palm oil, not to mention timber and fish. But it's almost unbelievable because the immense wealth generated from these resources rarely trickles down to build essential infrastructure. To this day, a country generating billions in mineral wealth has very few sealed roads. Travel is still primarily done by quick air hops or small boats.
And this completely unequal distribution of resources leads us directly to our final chapter, modern growing pains, systemic challenges.
The developmental hurdles here are multifaceted and severe. High urban unemployment is actively fueling crime rates, particularly as the traditional institutions of social control, like those vital clan councils, start breaking down in the anonymous environments of the cities. On top of that, education is in an absolute crisis, with a staggering 400,000 primary school-age children completely lacking access. The healthcare system remains severely fragmented and geographically isolated. Rural clinics run out of basic supplies all the time. And towering over all of this is the escalating threat of climate change, which poses a severe risk to the island's incredibly fragile biocultural diversity.
We actually saw these tensions boil over in major events like the Bougainville crisis and the ensuing Sandline affair in 1997. This was a complex, devastating rebellion sparked by bitter disputes over mine wealth and severe environmental pollution from the copper mines. The situation got so desperate that the government literally authorized a contract to hire private mercenaries, which led to massive public protests and a severe political scandal. This event perfectly highlights the extreme political, social, and economic instability the government has to navigate daily when trying to manage immense new wealth within a developing framework.
So what does all this mean for the future? It brings us to a final, provocative thought. Can a nation built on 800 distinct cultures, thrust from prehistoric isolation into a modern, globalized economy in less than a century, actually survive the immense pressures of the modern world? Ultimately, the key takeaway from this explainer is the sheer scale and speed of Papua New Guinea's transformation. It's a profound human experiment in resilience, governance, and identity. Thanks for exploring this with me, and I hope this journey has left you with a much deeper understanding of the paradox of paradise.